our two presenters tonight. The first who's going to start off for us is Padraig Doyle. And Padraig, I might invite you to start sharing your screen now and get set up while I let the guys know a little bit more about your background, and Neil as well. Padraig is going to start us off on this talk, and he's a senior engineer in the drainage department and the, excuse me, I've just lost my, sorry, senior engineer in the planning policy and development control section in Dublin City Council. He chairs the SuDS working group, and he's a former chair of the Water and Environmental Society here in Engineers Ireland, who are also, we're delighted to be co-hosting this event with us this evening. As you can tell, drainage is not the top of a transportation project, so it's quite a crossover between these two societies. So we're delighted for those guys' support this evening as well. Padraig has began work with Matt Galvines in the UK. He's worked with Tipperary and Dublin City Council, Matt McDonald Consulting Engineers, but the most of his career has been in either water or drainage. He's been the Deputy Project Engineer for the Greater Dublin Strategic Drainage Study, where they formally introduced the requirements for SuDS in Dublin originally. And he's also worked in the roads maintenance section and the senior RE on the Lewis Cross City project. Neil is going to share the presentation this evening with him. Neil is a senior executive engineer in the drainage department also. He's currently managing DCC's project to deliver the SuDS guidance documents, and he sits on that SuDS working group with Padraig, as well as the DCC Public Realm Working Group, which involves promoting the inclusion of the design of SuDS schemes in various projects. So in that regard, Neil is also working on significant enough projects that are going or include Dublin City Council's area, such as Bus Connects, Metrolink, Dart West, and the Clontarf City Centre project. So look, I'm looking forward to what you've got to say, guys. There's obviously a big connection between new hard surfaces and having to manage surface water across the city. So I'll hand it over to you, Padraig. If you could just turn on your microphone there, and I'll confirm that you're coming across all loud and clear. And guys, during the talk, just the last thing, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A section on the Zoom box, and I'll triage and call them out at the end of the 40 minutes or so, and we can go through it. The guys will be happy to take as many questions as they can, and so hopefully around about an hour or so. So don't use the chat for questions, use the Q&A section. Thanks very much, Padraig. Welcome along. How are you?
Thanks very much, Roy. As far as I'm aware, my mic and camera and everything else is working here okay. Is that
all good to me?
You're picking up great stuff.
Can you hear me, Roy, too? Yeah.
I can, Neil. Off you go, guys.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome here tonight. It's a fine sunny evening, so I was afraid might be very few people turning up, but I'm assured there's a good crowd of you out there. When Roy first gave us the task of trying to make drainage interesting for transport engineers, this was the first image that came to mind. This was taken a few years back. Don't be fooled by the fact that there's two bicycle lights and high-vis clothing. This was taken in Dublin City Centre, or rather underneath Dublin City Centre. Probably the most interesting thing to note from my point of view is this is an old blockwork, so we don't really make them like this anymore. So like a lot of our sewers in Dublin, this is very, very old, and that's something we'll refer to again further on in the presentation. I have to confess, I feel a little bit like Marty McFly this evening. For younger members of the audience that don't know who he is, Marty McFly was the time traveler in Back to the Future. Back in 2004, 2005, I spent a lot of time giving talks to the Institution of Engineers of Ireland, or the ICE, or basically anyone who'd listen on the topic of SuDS. And as Roy alluded to there, I was Deputy Project Engineer in the Greater Dublin Strategic Drainage Study, which basically, I suppose, copper fastens the requirement for SuDS throughout the Dublin region. There has been quite a bit of good news back since those days, I have to say. The implementation of SuDS maybe hasn't been all we would have hoped for. It's been, I think the acceptance of SuDS in principle is very good. The implementation, particularly on public projects, hasn't been all that it might be. That being said, there have been big improvements in our water. I mean, I remember back in those days in the pubs, we'd sing Summer in Dublin, people would belt out about the Liffeys that stank like hell. I can assure you the Liffey doesn't stink like hell anymore. We now have salmonid species in the Cammock and the Talca. We have got the two major bird sanctuaries. We've got the Dublin Bay Biosphere, and when you consider that we are a major European capital city, rapidly expanding, yet with still depending on drainage infrastructure built by the Victorians, we have two bathing beaches right in the city. So I mean, that's, in many ways, that's quite an achievement. That being said, it's not all good news. We do have two beaches. We do have however, lost our third one. Merrion was closed last year, permanently closed as a bathing water because of water quality problems. The Liffey may not stink like hell anymore, but we're nowhere close to where we'd like to be in terms of our objectives under the Water Framework Directive. And flooding remains a constant challenge in the city. We did have loss of life through flooding only 10 years ago. We don't get it quite this bad on a regular basis, but it's still a constant threat. And of course, that threat is increased by climate change. Climate change exacerbates both the flood risk and the water quality risk. Now, shout out to you guys in the room tonight. I mean, I know people are doing a lot of work on cycling projects and bus quality corridors and all the rest. And a major aim of that work is to reduce carbon emissions. That's very welcome and very positive. But I suppose we all have to face up to the fact too that it's not going to stop climate change in the short term. We're still going to see some rises. We are going to see increased rainfall and increased flood risk. We have to address that, and SuDS is one of the key ways we can do that. I'm not going to start teaching any grannies out there how to suck eggs, but just basically for anyone who doesn't already know, most of Dublin city centre is on a combined sewer system, and quite an old combined sewer system at that. That is to say, all the sewage and all the rainwater goes into the same pipe. When that pipe can't take the flows of it anymore, it overflows and sewage is discharged out into the rivers, out into our streams, out into Dublin Bay. That's not good news in terms of water quality, as anyone can imagine. So that is something we're trying to avoid, and really the way we need to avoid that is by limiting the amounts of rainwater that gets into those sewers in the first place. We've got to make sure that we use every possible opportunity to reverse the flows into those sewers. I may not have mentioned most of those sewers are already well above capacity. So we need to try and take water out of those sewers if at all possible, or at the very least not allow any increases. So what we can't afford to have happening is where we are providing new impermeable areas, we have to make sure they're not draining into our existing systems. In many ways, drainage engineers have been the mole people for a long, long time. Basically, people didn't know we existed and didn't particularly want to know. Well, everyone knows you flush the toilet and it disappears. But on the surface water side, there's little holes in the ground. The water goes into them, it goes away somewhere. Nobody really talks about it, nobody thinks about it thereafter, and it shouldn't cause any problems. I'm afraid those days are gone, guys. That to an extent, I suppose you could say the more people are voting, but we need space now above ground. We need to implement SuDS. We need to treat rainwater in a more holistic fashion and try to intercept rainwater in a more natural catchment-based way. What that means is we need space at ground level. And that's unfortunate because here, and I don't need to tell you people this, there is a very real demand for space at ground level, particularly in the city centre areas. Don't get me wrong, I am very, very aware of the work you guys do, and I'm very aware of the challenges when you're asked to put in a new bus corridor or a new cycle lane or something else that you basically don't have a lot of room to work with, sorry. What does strike me lately though, if there's enough pressure, if there's enough demand from politicians, from the media, from our own senior management for something to be done, if something is seen as a priority, then generally speaking, space can be found. Sorry, that's one recent example in Dublin. That's another one. So these are all areas where we would have been told for years there was no space to do anything. And even beyond the needs of transport or the needs to have pretty plants out, we've seen on-street dining lately. Now, yes, some of these measures are temporary. Some of these measures may ultimately be reversed. But it does set you thinking. It does make you think if there was real political demand, if there was real buy-in to this, if needs for drainage infrastructure, for flood prevention, for water quality were given a higher priority, I think we could find the space we need. The drivers for SuDS for us are The requirement under the GDSDS, that's been in the Dublin City Development Plan for years. We're hoping to further copper fasten some of those requirements in the new City Development Plan coming out of 2022. We're all aware of the Climate Change Action Plan, the EU Water Framework Directive, the SuDS Directive, like I mentioned, the Bathing Water Directive as well. These are all driving the need for SuDS. On top of that, we're looking at delivering better places for people in Dublin. We're looking at delivering a greener city. As well as that, I'll just reference it here. There's a parallel project going on at national level through the department, where they're looking at trying to get an increased rollout of what they're calling water-sensitive urban design. Now, I'm not going to start going into detail about what that means tonight. Basically, it's very similar to SuDS, and what they're looking at is more and more uptake of the natural water retention measures, the green SuDS getting away from the oversized pipes and tanks, which quite frankly, we'd all like to get away from anyway. On that project, they're seeking to engage with interested stakeholders. It's being run by Adrian Conway, formerly of Dublin City Council. I'm sure Adrian will welcome any input on that from anyone here in this talk. I've been talking about SuDS and the assumption everyone knows what I'm talking about. It always strikes me that maybe one or two people who don't. What we're looking at basically is trying to mimic natural drainage processes. So you're looking at trying to intercept the water at surface level where it falls. You're looking at managing runoff close to the surface. That's much better for water quality. It's much easier to deal with it spread over a larger area rather than trying to put everything into a little pipe and looking after that further downstream. There are multiple benefits to be got from SuDS. They include your water quantity and quality, like we've already talked about, but they can also give you a great biodiversity gain. And there is, I think only in the last couple of days, Dublin City Council went to public consultation on a new biodiversity action plan. That's something you're going to be hearing a lot more about. We're all aware of, I was going to say birds and bees, but certainly pollinators. There are problems there. There are a lot of issues where we're losing biodiversity, and one of the key things in tackling climate change is to get it back. SuDS well designed can also give us immediacy for local communities, can help us to adapt to climate change, can help us with carbon management. I won't talk in any great detail on the SuDS management train. This is a concept some of you will be aware of. Again, rather than putting everything into a pipe down to a big tank and trying to deal with it there, the idea is you deal with your stormwater in a couple of different places. You take it out as you go along. You're dealing that way with your quality issues, and you're dealing with your overall volume. I'm going to just talk very briefly about a couple of different SuDS types. I mean, I'm not going to start going into green roofs or whatever. That's not really relevant to this talk. I believe there's massive potential in urban transport projects for porous or permeable pavements. I mean, sometimes you can get a bit of bad press. Sometimes people on roads believe these things won't stand up long term. The fact of the matter is we have permeable pavements in container docks in South America that are standing up 30 years later. If these are well designed, they can function just as well as anything else. The idea, again, for anyone not familiar, and I assume most people are, is that water, rather than running off to a drain, actually soaks down through that surface. You're dependent on a bit of infiltration, but not necessarily either. Even if there's no infiltration potential, you've got quite a lot of storage underneath there. You can have an overflow to a surface water system. It will slow down and absorb a lot of your problem water. Bioretention systems I mentioned already. Again, huge potential for use of these in urban areas. Again, the idea is you get water goes into the bioretention area. It can either be taken up by plants who need it anyway. It can sit there in storage. You can have filtration media underneath it. You can have a certain amount of storage before it overflows to another system. Infiltration, I've already mentioned. You will hear people talking about boulder clays in Dublin and lack of infiltration capacity, but even with boulder clays, there is some small bit of runoff all the time. And again, most of the time what we're trying to deal with for quality is our smaller storms. These kind of systems with a little bit of storage will take those storms no problem. I'm not going to talk too much about swales. Swales are probably very relevant in housing estates or areas where you have a bit more space, possibly less so in transport projects. But again, if they're done well, a swale can work even in a relatively dense area. Rain gardens, again, similar to biofiltration. Detention basins, retention ponds are kind of quite similar ideas. Again, you can have a certain amount of amenity value here. But also importantly, you may say these can't be used in urban areas. You know, there's always potential what to use a roundabout for. There are always little areas that can be considered. So there may well be potential for these in transport schemes. Retention ponds, probably less so. Again, you see these in motorways to an extent, less so in urban areas, but they have got potential. Okay, thanks very much, folks. So then I'm going to turn you over to my colleague Neil, who's going to talk in a bit of detail about ideas for transport schemes.
Hi all. I see you have a question already, Park. You're getting interest up.
Okay.
Basically, what I'm going to talk about is just case studies that I've seen that have incorporated SuDS into the transport system. This first example here is Streatham Street in London. You have a photograph of before and after where they've retrofitted a rain garden into the street, and I think there's a few more down there. And basically, what this rain garden does, it captures the surface water runoff on the surface before it goes into the combined network, and it stores up to 6 cubic meters of runoff. So this is the sort of thing we want to see in Dublin. I think it would be an excellent idea for reducing flooding events and for also reducing surface water runoff into the combined network. The next one is Greener Grangetown in Cardiff, Wales. This is a massive project where they retrofitted about 108 rain gardens into Cardiff city centre. This removes 40,000 cubic meters of rainfall runoff from entering the combined sewer network. That's about 20 swimming pools that they are saving from getting into the combined network over the space of a year. Now that's a massive volume of rainfall runoff. The next project is the Green Sheffield project, where they put in a 1.6 kilometre green street with rain gardens, swales, fire retention systems in the city centre. Now this project is one of the biggest retrofit projects in the UK, and I just think it'd be excellent if we can get something like this in Dublin. Even a small percentage of this in Dublin would be just excellent. There's a few photographs there, Park, if you want to click through.
You want that one, Neil?
Yeah, this is how these systems work. Basically, they take the runoff from from the roadway, and they store it at the surface level. Therefore, it either attenuates slowly and goes back into the combined network, or it infiltrates into the ground underneath. Next slide there, please. This is an example of a permeable paving system that has been put in Mendora Road in London. Again, I think this was more a pilot project, but again, this would be an excellent idea, maybe if we can get something like this in Dublin, just to see how something like this would work. Basically, what they've done here is they put in permeable block paving either side of the road, and the rainfall runoff, it obviously hits the surface there, and then it flows into the permeable paving, and it's stored in the permeable paving, and it's either it re-enters the combined network or it infiltrates into the ground. Next slide there, please.
Worth mentioning there too, Neil, that you're removing the need for a piped and gully system, or even if you want a couple of gullies for overflow, there's a much lesser requirement for them in that kind of system.
Yeah, correct. Again, another example is, again, over the UK, it's Alma Road, Enfield. This road had a number of issues with flooding and pollution into the local river. And basically what they've done here, again, it's a retrofit scheme where they've retrofitted a number of rain gardens into the street. And this has, it has reduced flooding and pollution. And the rain gardens, they did a few calculations on this, and the rain gardens actually store a 1 in 5 year storm event, which is very impressive. It also, if you look at it to next slide, that slide, you can see it kind of improves the public realm too, with nice plants and greenery. So it benefits so many different aspects. Next slide there, please, Park. This is a scheme, again, in the UK, in North Street, Killyleagh. This is an example of where they've retrofitted a number of tree pits. If you go to the next slide there, Park. Next slide again. Basically here they're adding an extra traffic lane, and these tree pits were put in. And basically they act as stormwater attenuation and treatment pits, where they actually store the water and treat it. And there's a few calculations done on this where they store a 1 in 30 year storm event, which again is an excellent storage facility. As Padraig was saying earlier, we're trying to capture the rainfall runoff on the street surface for as long as possible before it either goes in back into the combined network, or it infiltrates into the ground. So all these types of sods are actually very helpful. Next slide there, Padraig, please. In New York, they've put in a number of rain gardens. Would you believe they've put in nearly 3,000 of these rain gardens into the city centre? There's a few more slides there, Padraig, just to see how these rain gardens operate. Basically, like we've seen in the numerous examples before, these store about 5 or 6 cubic meters of rainfall runoff from entering the combined network there in New York City. So again, it's the same principle. They're storing the rainfall runoff on the street surface and slowly releasing it back into the combined network or infiltrating it into the ground. So again, this is reducing your flooding incidents. It's reducing your combined sewer network overflows into the rivers, so reducing pollution into the local rivers. So some of these are just excellent ideas to incorporate into the road structure. This slide here is I just threw it in here because it's a cycle lane. Basically, it's a pilot scheme of a cycle lane, which is called Plastic Road. It's a modular system, and basically what it does, it captures and stores the rainwater underneath it, and it allows the rainfall runoff then to gradually infiltrate into the soil. Now, this has been trialed in a number of cities around the world. This is Mexico City, but it's also been trialed there in Europe and a few of the cities in Holland. Now, I think with all the projects that are ongoing in Dublin City, such as, we'll talk about them later on, but bus connects and some of the big cycle projects, this would be an excellent idea, just to even trial it for a couple of 100 meters, just to see how it would work and if it could be incorporated on a bigger scale. But it would be good just to trial it out, just to see how this works, and if it helps to store the rainfall runoff. I think it's just something that I've seen recently. Next slide there, Padraig, please. Opportunities to implement SuDS in Dublin. Dublin City Centre came out recently with the Public Realm Master Plan. Just the next slide, Padraig, then, is like, this is a huge plan for the public realm in Dublin City, where we propose to I think there's 90 plus projects over the next 10 years. So there's huge potential to put in some of these SuDS that I've just shown you into some of these up and coming public realm projects. Next slide there, Padraig, please. Again, there's big, huge transport projects ongoing. You've got bus connects, you've got Metrolink, you have the Dart West, you have greenways, you have cycle projects. Like the bus connects itself, that's 230 kilometers of new bus lane and 200 kilometers of cycle lane. So there's a potential there to put in a number of these examples we've seen, like, in terms of rain gardens, fire retention areas, swales, wetlands. There's definitely a potential there for this. Next slide there, please, Padraig. Just some of the SuDS now that have been implemented in Dublin City. This is a good example here is in Crumlin Village, where the road section put in a number of tree pits and permeable paving. And basically what this system does here, it drains all the rainfall runoff from this pavement area, and it stores it within the tree pit system. So it's then gradually either infiltrates into the ground or goes back into the combined network. So again, what Padraig was saying earlier, like you're basically slowing down the process of rainfall runoff going into the combined network, and then obviously mitigating against flooding problems and CSO problems. So like this is a very, very good example. The next slide then, Padraig, is another example there of SuDS in Chatham Street. This is the park section. I put in a number of tree pits and rain gardens in Chatham Street. Again, it's the same principle. These systems are taking the rainfall runoff off the pedestrian zone there, quite a significant area. And this is inner city Dublin. This is just off Grafton Street, where the whole area is serviced by a combined network. So these tree pits, when it rains, the runoff will go into these tree pits and the large storage areas within them, and it'll be stored in there and then gradually fed back into the combined network. So again, this is a a great case to show where we're trying to mitigate against flooding and CSO spillages. Next slide there, Padraig, please. Another one is the SuDS on Dominic Street Lower. This was part of the Lewis project, where they put in these a number of rain gardens, which is very interesting to see in Dublin now. There's not too many examples of these in Dublin, but this is a very good example of including rain gardens here to take basically what these do, they take the rainfall runoff off the paved area. And I don't know exactly, I think they could be designed for a 1 in 5 year event, but they actually, these rain gardens now have been in place for what, 4 or 5 years now. So they look pretty impressive to me, like, and they're still functioning. I've been out at them when it's been raining, so they're still functioning well, like. So like, these things do work, you know, if they're put in place and they're well maintained and managed, they will work, like, you know. So they will work in Dublin City, and I've already shown you a couple of examples of the UK, but like, there's so many examples of these, like, around the world, and there's no reason why these can't work in Dublin city centre, like, you know. Next slide then, Padraig, please. This is a project we're working on in Suffolk Street. It's just a public realm project, and it's an example of where possibly we could incorporate some rain gardens and tree pits into the fabric of the road there. I think it's going to be pedestrianised anyway, but it's a very good example of where there's possibility of incorporating rain gardens and tree pits and these SuDS systems that we've shown. And then again, this is part of the Suffolk Street project too, where at the junction of Suffolk Street and Grafton Street, there's a potential maybe to put in a rain garden, you know, to capture the runoff from Grafton Street. The big problem with Grafton Street is there's a lot of granite on it, and when it rains, the runoff flows very quickly off that granite in Grafton Street, and it all flows down Grafton Street to this junction. So there's a potential here to put in some sort of rain garden to capture that rainfall runoff. And it's again, back to the two issues it's going to resolve. It's going to resolve flooding in this local area, and also it's going to slow down the rainfall runoff going into the combined network, which again serves this area. So it's kind of, it actually looks very well too. Like this is only a photo montage, like, but this looks good. Like, you know, if it's well maintained and managed, it's kind of it'll enhance the whole area, you know. And obviously also it's got all the other benefits that Padraig has already mentioned, the amenity and the biodiversity and numerous benefits from it. This is just an overview plan of the scheme. Again, it's still work in progress, and I think there's 2 or 3 rain gardens proposed, and maybe 3 or 4 tree pits proposed for this area. And I think it'd be good just if we can get something like this on the ground in Dublin City, and maybe link it in with some research project just to see how these things perform in Dublin City over a year or so, like, and just to get a bit of data, just to see how things perform in Dublin, like, you know. The next slide there, please, Padraig. Challenges of implementing SuDS. I think the first line here is huge. The adoption, ownership, and maintenance of SuDS. This is massive. The whole taking in charge, like, it's well and good proposing all these nice rain gardens and swales and wetlands and all the different systems. Like, if nobody's going to agree to take them in charge and maintain them going forward, that's a huge issue, and it has to be really resolved. Like at some of the projects that I was showing you earlier on, there's one there in Cardiff. It was the one in Cardiff was the Greener Grangetown in Cardiff, Wales. That was a joint project between the local authority, Cardiff City Council, and the Welsh Water. So they came up with an agreement to put in the SuDS systems, and also there was an agreement in place to maintain them going forward. So it's just interesting, some of the case studies you see from the UK on these things are actually put in place and how they're maintained. The next one also is an issue, difficulty in retrofitting SuDS in a city centre environment. I know if you start digging holes anywhere in this Dublin city, you're going to come across a lot of services and utilities, which is fair enough. You know, that's in every city, like, you know. But there are companies out there that do these SuDS systems with the crate systems that actually can get around services. Like some of the examples I've shown you previously are SuDS in major city centres, like all those examples in Sheffield, in London, like they're all in the city centre, and like there wouldn't be as many, like that would be a similar scenario to Dublin in terms of utilities and services, like, you know, there'd be no real difference between those cities, like, you know, because so SuDS can actually be incorporated. It's just all about the design and getting a proper system in place. The next one there is the importance of including the SuDS design in your surface water management plan at the start. You know, you got to get in there early, and I think I have more on this in the next slide, but you got to get in early with your SuDS design into any design, so that everybody else can obviously see what you're doing, you know, and there's no point coming in at the last minute. You know, you've got to get in and say, look, we have to put in some sort of SuDS system here and get in early. Again, the next line there is getting the multiple benefits out of SuDS too. This is an important one. Like we would try to prioritize the rain gardens and the bioretentions and the swales and the wetlands, because you're getting your amenity and biodiversity benefits from them. Again, they would be prioritized over permeable paving, you know, because the likes of a rain garden, like that's going to offer such benefits to the city centre. Even the aesthetically, it's going to look nice, as you've seen some of the photomontages there of Suffolk Street. Next slide there, Padraig, please.
I think before we move on to it, it's just worth mentioning that's the whole reason we've set up this SuDS working group in the City Council. We're working very proactively now with all the different sections, with architects and parks people and planners and roads and all the rest, because all of these problems can be solved and are being solved all over the world on a regular basis. There's no reason we can't face up to all these issues. So we do recognise there are issues out there, but we are making good progress in resolving those by working cooperatively with the different sections within the council.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I have that mentioned in the next slide. Yeah.
Sorry.
So basically what we're doing currently in Dublin City Council, we have appointed a consultant, McCloy Consultants, to produce a SuDS guidance document for DCC. This SuDS guide is focused on, there'll be two guides. So there will be to this. The first guide is it's going to be focused on new development and redevelopment. And then the second guide is going to be focused on public realm, roads and retrofit. Now, McCloy's were appointed for this way back in September. And there's been a lot of workshops and meetings and just a lot of discussion between departments and sections in DCC to see exactly what we want here. And as Padraig already talked about, we've set up a whole SuDS working group where we have representatives from parks, roads, city architects, planners, housing. Nearly every section in DCC or department is included in this working group. And we're trying to all work together to come up with a guide that works for everybody. You know, it just doesn't work for drainage. It works for parks. It works for roads. It works for planners. It works for architects. We're trying to bring everybody on board. I think it's very important that we bring everybody on board to produce this guide. You know, because there's hundreds of guides out there on the internet. You know, loads of them, and like there's not too many good SuDS examples in Dublin, like, you know. So we try to have to kind of change that, you know. And there's plenty of good examples in developments and stuff, like, but we're trying to get as many SuDS now as possible into the public realm and into these big transfer projects. And I think this guide, with the backing of all the different departments and sections, will actually help us. It'll give the likes of Bus Connects and all the different big projects an idea of what we want and what's agreed from the different sections in DCC. Like the drainage agree with it, parks agree with it, roads. it'll give us a suite of SuDS options to give over to these projects to say, look, this is what all the different sections in DCC have agreed with, and can you incorporate them into your project? Like, I think that's the most important thing, that we get everybody on board, and there's a plan in place for actually taking these SuDS in charge and maintaining them going forward. Just another thing, the McCloys they're working on a SuDS database tool too, where we're capturing all the SuDS past and present that have been incorporated in Dublin City, and we're putting them up on the corporate GIS so that people can actually click in. I think we've over about 200 already. People can click into these SuDS and see exactly what's in place in the different areas, and there'll be a whole list of characters with it in terms of like photographs and size, SuDS type, how the SuDS perform, the maintenance plan, when was it built. There's a whole list of different characters will be included in this too. Just to mention also, the McCloy team are also working on SuDS pilot sites in 2 catchments, the River Santry catchment and the River Dodder catchment, where they're looking at, I think, about nine pilot sites where they're going to start incorporating a lot of the examples I've mentioned before, the rain gardens, tree pits, wetlands, swales. They're going to start incorporating them into the fabric of the road and into the residential areas, and then they're going to see how they perform over maybe a year or 2. And I think this will be very valuable just to see how these systems perform in an Irish context. And I think that project is very exciting. Final slide here is going forward with SuDS. As I said before, there's plenty of opportunities to implement SuDS in Dublin City. Going back to the master plan, there are 90 plus projects ongoing over the next 10 years. Bus Connects, Metrolink, all the different cycle projects. Huge potential for getting some of these SuDS in. A few main pointers, like as I said before, early planning discussions are essential. You've got to get everybody on board at the start, or else somebody's going to come in at the end and say, there's no way you're putting that in. You got to get people on board. Again, the whole cross-departmental approach is so important. You got to have drainage, parks, roads, planning, architects, housing. You've got to get them all on board, or it's not going to work. We've seen this over the last number of years of great SuDS ideas, and they just never happen. So if we get everybody on board, then things will happen. Another important point is it has to be SuDS design has to be multidisciplinary. You just can't have a drainage engineer there. You have to have your landscape architect. You have to have people experienced in biodiversity. You got to get a whole team of different professionals in there to look at this. There's so many different components to a successful SuDS that it has to be multidisciplinary. Again, well-designed SuDS can be cheaper than traditional drainage. We've seen that in a few examples. It's very easy to see online. Some of these SuDS examples there, I didn't give any costs to the earlier ones, but they're coming in some of them are coming in at fractions of traditional drainage pipes, and there could be anything up to maybe 50% cheaper, again, that's another thing actually McCloys will be including in their the guidance document. They'll be doing a comparison between SuDS designs and your old traditional drainage pipe systems. My final point would be just to keep it simple. These things don't have to be complicated. If you've seen some of the photographs there, those rain gardens, it's not that difficult. They're just they're not that complicated systems. And with good design, they can be easily incorporated into a road project, a housing project, a whole list of projects, So that's it for me, Park. If you want to add a few more things there.
Oh, I think you covered most of it, Neil. Again, just to reiterate, this is something we're not doing for fun. There really is no other option out there in terms of helping protect the city against flooding and helping to preserve our water quality and make sure things improve or at least don't get any worse. So this is a vital part of what we do. We are very, very aware of the pressures some of you guys are under in trying to get traffic infrastructure built in the city. There are certainly clashes there, but these are all issues we can work together on, and we feel there is great potential, as Neil says, to introduce these measures in Dublin for everyone's benefit. Thanks.
Great, thank you guys.